Also from my side, my name is Erich Schweighofer. I'm the program chair, and I'm quite honored introducing to this panel who will be building the legal applications of the future. There's one quite clear fact that it's not only lawyers who do that, so a big change actually. And we are very honored by the chairman, Professor Tjoa. He's from the Technical University of Vienna. He was before also from the University of Vienna, then University of Linz. To describe him as a professor is a bit, let's say, not well, because he's doing much more. He's more a motivator, a scientific organizer of the whole field, because he's active in many universities. He has been president of the Austrian Computing Society. He's organizing a network of conferences, the DEXA, Database and Expert System, since 1990. And he was founded two research centers, Secure Business Austria and the E-Commerce Center. Secure Business Austria is still the biggest one. And he's also head of an institute. It's about over 100 researchers. So combined with the SPR, it's 150 researchers he is managing. So that's, and he's also active in the international field of computing, IFIP to be mentioned, but also other environments, also United Nations in a research group concerning scientific development and IT. And he's also active, I must say, scientific cooperation between EU and Asia, particularly Austria and Asia. So we describe him as a scientific organizer of developments, a motivator, and he was also quite helpful in motivating, developing legal informatics in Austria, because people working there, being active there, were not so much cooperative, and he helped to organize the group for a while at the beginning in the 1990s, and he was also quite successful in organizing and mostly pushing my PhD through, because my habilitation through, because at that time the law faculty was quite reluctant to do that, but still, together with the late Yon Bing, he convinced the faculty to move on to do that. So I'm sure you're a great motivator, organizer, and also active in legal tech and legal informatics with your skills as organizer, so you can do a lot of things, develop it, and leave the work to others who are willing to do that and organize that. Thank you for that, and I hand over to you for organizing this panel. Thank you.
So thank you, Eric, for the nice introduction. I am very honored to be here at this panel, and I'm very happy having three renowned panelists, which I want to briefly introduce. So first I want to introduce Brian, and this is just a very, very short introduction of his, because I would need many pages of PowerPoint to introduce him. Most of all, he is a professor at the Hong Kong University in the law area. He was a corporate finance and capital market lawyer with nearly 20 years of experience in Hong Kong, New York, Silicon Valley, Australia. And he has an award-winning investment banking counsel at Credit Suisse in Hong Kong until 2013. And Brian has worked on some of the largest and most cutting-edge equity debt and merger and acquisition transactions across the Asia-Pacific region. But what is interesting for this panel is he created and established new interdisciplinary and experimental law, innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship program at the University of Hong Kong, with a focus on legal tech, fintech, AI, blockchain, and inclusive technology. And what is even more interesting is that these programs are part of a degree, of a fintech degree, at the Faculty of Engineering at the Department of Computer Science. So he established a new interdisciplinary program at the Department of Computer Science of the Faculty of Engineering, and also a second one, which is perhaps even more interesting because it's on design plus, or at the Faculty of Architecture. Another feature which is interesting in this context is he is the director of ECMI, the Asian Capital Market Institute, which provides global thought leadership, industry-wide consensus building, and transformational support for technology, educational, and policy solutions, especially, again, in artificial intelligence. ECMI is also focused on RegTech, LawTech, online capital marketplaces, and responsibility frameworks for AI. So there's really cross-fertilization of AI, design, blockchain, so modern technology with law. And I'm very, very happy to have Brian here. Second panelist, the second panelist I want to introduce is Jonathan Askin. Jonathan Askin is professor at Brooklyn Law School, teaching technology, telecommunications, and entrepreneurial law and policy. And he is the founder of Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic. It should be perhaps noted that this kind of law clinics or legal clinics are not so known by many of the law students, although in Vienna since a few years we have also a legal law clinic concentrating mainly on immigration law and startups. So these two fields. And Jonathan is faculty chair and innovation catalyst for the Brooklyn Law Center for Urban Business Entrepreneurship. And what is again interesting, like Brian, he was visiting professor at the MIT, at the renowned MIT Media Lab, which deals with design, modern media, architecture, etc. He was a Fulbright scholar with the University of Amsterdam at the Institute of Information Law, so also some insights for continental Europe. Fellow at the Columbia Institute of Teleinformation, adjunct professor at Columbia Law School, etc., etc., etc. And he is founder of a network of, again, legal support clinics for the European startup community. So we have two persons who also have worked together in the area of legal clinics, where I think we could learn a lot in Austria. And perhaps of some interest, Jonathan chaired the Internet Governance Working Group for the Obama 2008 presidential campaign. So I'm very, very happy to have Jonathan here as a panelist, and we are very honored to have him at this panel. The third panelist is Stefan Eder. Stefan studied law and informatics in Vienna, which was something pioneering at his time. He did his master in informatics on legal expert system based on Prolog. That's why we are very happy that at the last ReMeP, Kowalski was one of our keynote speakers. And Stefan knew the work of Kowalski even already as a student. So now we see his very profound background in informatics and logic. He practiced as a partner for more than 30 years in large and mid-sized law firms. And in the last years, he focused on legal digitalizations, also autonomous driving, etc. So all facets of digitalization. He is a partner at Ben Ibler, an Austrian, large Austrian renowned law firm. He is partner in Sibley, a legal tech company that runs an open legal database with about 50,000 users and specializes in legal information extraction, legal data structures, and the legal digitalization processes. And he is working with a team of lawyers and coders on various new, innovative legal tech applications. And last but not least, I think everybody in this audience know him also as the initiator of ReMeP. So this is for the beginning. So I'm very, very happy to have these three panelists. And perhaps to start with, as pointed out by Schweighofer, Eric, I am not a specialist in legal tech, but I have to deal with many issues of legal tech. Especially, I'm interested in the role of AI, in the possibilities of AI to help us in advanced search capabilities, which is, I think, very, very important also in the law field. We are very interested on responsible AI, knowing the possible negative impacts of AI. We are very interested in explainable AI, which is, I think, very, very important in the legal area. Most of us in our field, at our institutes and research institutes, are interested on explainable AI, especially on issues in the field of medicine, because no therapies, no diagnosis are possible or can be trusted and can be certified if there's no explanation. And as we all know, just using deep learning, etc., we can have very, very perfect diagnosis systems, but many times we don't have any explanation, and therefore it is very questionable if it could be used solely by AI. We still need, in these cases, the help of the medical staff. And in the same way, I think we have the same problems in the area of LigTech. Then we deal, as pointed out by Eric, in Secure Business Austria, a lot with issues of blockchain. And blockchain is another area, I think, which is very, very interesting field in the for lawyers in the legal tech, if we speak about also issues of the right to be forgotten in blockchain, also in the field of supply chain, documentation, ledgers, and all kinds of positive things we can see in blockchains. Expert systems, which is a field of Stefan from the very past, is important. And a few weeks ago, I read something about divorce systems in legal tech, where for divorces, one can use a lot of AI-based systems to automatize divorces. Then we have, in the field of journalism, which is now very important in times of fake news, the issue of e-discovery. I just remind you to the Panama Papers, where in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung, together with an Austrian newspaper, together did this kind of drilling down this kind of papers with e-discovery. Without e-discovery, it would be impossible to get some results in a short time. Important issue also at my institute is the issue of open data, of open source, open government. So these are projects we are focusing on, and we are always very happy if we have some advice from the legal area. And I think here we could have some cross-fertilization, because like in medicine, we have already master studies in medical informatics. And now we just started with a study which is called data science, where students from different technical studies jumping in to learn to continue their masters in data science. And I could imagine that something similar could be necessary or could be important in the legal tech area. So, and here we have two specialists from the US and from Hong Kong who has a lot of experience in this area. So another area would be also how to serve the public, how to harvest legal resources to the public, and to start with computational thinking, I think from the very beginning, which was started at Carnegie Mellon with Janet Wing, starting already with K-12 with computational thinking, and then of course continue perhaps in all studies some facets of computational thinking. So I want to stop here and want to start perhaps with some questions I imagined after knowing the competencies of the panelists. Some questions, contribution from panelists could be to Jonathan, for example, his knowledge on this blips and legal hackers. And perhaps if you, Jonathan, could start with a few messages, and then we will jump into the questions. I have some questions prepared also for Jonathan, Brian, and Stefan. And but before jumping into the questions, I would like to ask Jonathan to give a brief introduction to the panel. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks for having me. I want to tell you a little bit about my trajectory because I think it could inform where I think we're heading in the world of legal technology. I was never a legal technologist. Frankly, I was trained as a political scientist in university and then went to law school and became I became essentially an activist lawyer. I was a civil rights lawyer, a civil liberties lawyer. I was not a technology lawyer or a legal technologist. So I sort of stumbled into it, and I stumbled into it in a way that I think more and more lawyers are now stumbling into the concept of legal technology. I was a civil rights lawyer and I was bored to death. Around 1996 in the United States, we were experiencing that first internet revolution. We were writing new laws to pave the way for this new technology. And I thought, if I'm going to be a lawyer for the next 50 years, this to me is the great issue of the day. I don't want to get mired in the old battles from the 60s and 70s about civil rights and civil liberties. I wanted to get involved in framing the new laws for this new world order. So I went to DC and became a technology lawyer. Now, at the time I became a technology lawyer, I didn't really know there was a concept called legal technology. I thought I was a tech lawyer, not a legal technologist. But then when I started teaching, all of a sudden this concept of legal technology came on the map, on the radar. And because people thought knew I was a tech lawyer, they conflated the definition of tech law with legal tech. So all of a sudden, I am no longer just a tech lawyer, tech policy advocate. I am now a legal technologist somehow. Now, I've never had real coding classes. So for me, it's been a monumental learning curve. And coming from the position I came in, it was actually very easy for me to anticipate what the hurdles were going to be for my students and for lawyers coming into the profession. And so I started teaching about 13 years ago. I was teaching technology law and telecom law and decided I was going to create a more experiential program for my students to actually get hands-on experience working with new technologists, new ventures, exploring tech law issues, and now exploring legal technology issues. So what do you know? The first year I taught it, all of my students had hardcore degrees in computer science, electrical engineering. They were hardcore scientists who decided to come to law school. So they were easy. They were easy. Over the next couple of years, all of a sudden, more and more, and now upwards of about 90% of my law students come with backgrounds in humanities and social sciences. So that's been a bizarre, and I think a real transformation in the recognition that lawyers need to understand technology if they're going to play a role in this new universe that we're creating. So for me, it comes down to how can we train lawyers who are not necessarily steeped in technology to use the tools and the mindset of the technologist, but bring their backgrounds and skills and experience as thoughtful legal reasoners to bear on the future of technology and society and how we harness technology for society's advancements. So that's what I've been doing essentially for the past 13 years as an academic. And I got to tell you, it's been getting easier and easier and easier as the years go by. And a lot of that is due to the nature and usability of the technology that's been available. It used to be we would just rapidly prototype very rudimentary access to justice or legal automation tools using whatever we can get our hands on, but we always needed a technologist to walk us through the process. That's changed pretty dramatically. And now I got to say, in the past 2-3 years or so, the tools, the tool sets, the interfaces have become essentially so user-friendly that even my most technology skittish law students are able to, within a couple hours, understand how to use the tools, but apply their legal reasoning to these nice interfaces and build legal automation or legal technology tools. Is it as easy as turning on a Mac and running the Mac? No, but we're getting there. So for me, there's been a nice evolution from you had to be a hardcore scientist to really understand what was going on to now you can bring your legal reasoning skills to bear in and help play an essential role in the framing of legal automation, legal technology for the advancement of society. I'll stop there for now. I think there's a million permutations we can go on, but I want to send it back to you, Professor, and to Brian and to Stefan.
Thank you very much. May I ask Brian to give a statement on, especially on the topic is who will be building the legal application of the future, and what?
Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much, Stefan, for inviting me over, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm particularly honored to be coming, and being on the same panel as Jonathan, who actually, we're all working on the shoulders of giants here. So since Jonathan started with the journey, I thought I'd start with a little journey as well, because there are some analogies. So when I went to law school, I wanted to do international law, right? So I did my first law degree in Australia, and then, we're going to do international law. You go to New York, right? So that's where the UN and the World Bank is close by. And so when I went to New York, what happened was the Asian economic crisis. So no project financing. I want to do emerging markets work. And so then somebody said to me, well, if you're interested in fund flows to the emerging markets, the capital markets has a greater fund flow. So I was like, oh, okay, let me give that a go then. Right. So then I joined private practice in New York. Sullivan Cromwell allowed me to do both project finance as well as domestic capital markets. So great, I did LATAM work. And then as a mid-level associate, I want to come back to Asia. But the partner said, Brian, you're kind of entrepreneurial. So will you please help set up a Palo Alto office? I'm like, okay. So instead of heading east, I went west, right? And that's when, after that, I didn't like wearing a tie. I got into the West Coast mode in the technology side, which is great. But, with technology, you see the up and you see the down as well. So then when after the .com, I went there just prior to the .com bust, and then it busted. So then I came back to New York, did biotech, and then I got headhunted and joined Credit Suisse here in Hong Kong. So for those that don't know, it's 1 a.m. in Hong Kong right now, although I'm in Australia. That complicates the story, but the same time zone. So if I meander, that might be a reason. So in Credit Suisse, we were covering Asia Pacific region, and I helped set up a joint venture in China. So doing a lot of those those kinds of things. And then a few years ago, I stepped out of that and I went into fintech, right? I set up ACMI, and through fintech, we went into regtech, and then so I was working in the entrepreneurial world. And then I learned about this thing called Global Legal Hackathon. I said, wow, that's great. Lawyers finally doing this hackathon stuff, right? And I asked around, so who's doing it in Hong Kong? And nobody was doing it. I said, well, look, if somebody will underwrite it, I'll organize it. Because I'd worked on hackathons in the tech space. So so Thomson Reuters underwrote that. We organized the first one in Hong Kong, and we were lucky. The first year, our top team made it to the finals in New York, and they won there on the Access to Justice level. So cool. So around that time, I had always had long relationships with Hong Kong University, in particular Professor Doug Arner, who's in the international financial law area, which was my space. And he said, Brian, would you be interested in, we're trying to launch a new initiative. Will you be interested in running that? So that's how I got involved in academia. I'm a brand newbie. I'm in my first year of my contract right now, right? So I set up, as Armin had mentioned, Light Lab, so Law, Innovation, Technology, Entrepreneurship. And in so many ways, I consider myself lucky because exactly as Jonathan, and through that, actually just prior to that, then I met with the legal hackers, and that's when I learned about the wonderful work that Jonathan and others, and the whole community, which is just wonderful. In some ways, some of the things I'm doing now, I couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. So Jonathan, 4 or 5 years ago, there was no code move. The no code was bubbling, but not quite user friendly yet. But now it's so easy. So and again, I can talk a little bit about more of that later on. But to answer the question, I guess, about who's going to be building it, let me use an analogy in my you wearing my other hat. So I'm the co-chair of the RegTech Committee, the FinTech Association in Hong Kong. And one of the big debates is, okay, talking about fintech. So who's going to build the fintechs of the world, right? So you've got the incumbent banks who are now having to innovate, right? And then you've got the fintechs, right? And right now in Hong Kong, we've got now virtual banks, 8 virtual bank licenses. So they're creating themselves, pure digital DNA and the like. And then you've also got the tech fins. You've got the Alibabas of the world, the Tencents, who are, ginormous, and they're saying, oh, this thing called finance, interesting, let's go into that too, right? So the answer, a way to answer it is to use that analogy with the legal space. We've got the incumbents, the law firms, who have to innovate, right? And now they're having lots of different strategies. You've got the alternative service providers or legal service companies, whatever you want to call it, in different areas, that are licensed to do certain things. And then you've got the hardcore, the startup legal techs bubbling around across the world. But then you have the Microsofts of the world, the Amazons of the world says, you know what? Legal tech, that sounds interesting. Let's get into that. So it'll be really interesting to see who actually develops and who the developers will be. You've got the domain experts, and we've been talking about law schools. And yes, that's great. You need domain expertise to actually conquer space, like in finance or in law. But you know what? You need the technologists as well, and the technologists can. So who's going to hire whom to build the new solutions of the future? Let me stop just there for now.
Thank you, Brian. And may I ask now, Stefan, to start with your opinions on who will be building the legal applications of the future, especially on the who and on the future.
Thank you, Armin. Thank you very much. This is very interesting, and I would like to start from a different angle first. For me, the question is, what is the product that is needed at the end of the day in the market? What do our clients want to see? What do the various players who want to use legal tech want to have? And at the end of the day, and getting back to something, Armin, you said before, I studied business informatics, as it was called. So also that was an interdisciplinary study at the time. I think we need people with that interdisciplinary approach. Whether or not that is one person or that is a team of people, that remains to be seen. For me, product, and sort of answer my first question myself, the product actually is that legal tech will only succeed if it integrates in processes, might it be in processes in government, in e-government, in e-justice, or in processes within law firms, or even more important, with processes within companies, corporates, whatever. And those processes are not limited to what we offer at the moment in legal tech. So it is not review contracts, or it is not mine certain information out of a document by using NLP software, or it is not sort of a certain reaction to something. So for me, it's all silos. There's a large number of silos in legal tech next to each other at the moment. I cannot see that any of those will succeed because they're missing something like a common platform. They're missing interfaces. They're missing sort of to fit into processes in the wider scale. And let me explain that on an example we are working on at the moment. That is, think about you want to automate the process of setting up a company. Now that is, you need to collect a lot of information. Who will be the shareholders? What will be the share capital? Who will be the directors of that company? You need to check whether or not the name is admissible, whether or not the subject matter of the company is admissible. You need to find out what is the share capital, etc. All of that is a sort of data you need to collect and put into your document. And for me, this is data I need to collect and keep for later in the process. Why do I need that? Because in that process, I not only collect data about objects and persons, I also collect data about relationships, for example. So there might be a person that is a shareholder, and the relationship is hold shares in that company. And there's a person that might be a director, and he sort of is subject to run that company. When I store that information and think my process a bit further, I will come to the situation where, of course, I create articles of association, for example, but by producing articles of association, I in parallel also create a document like an application to court, and the next document I should automatically create probably is the managing director's employment contract, and when I have that contract, I probably have to keep in mind there's an employment situation, and there is a situation where sort of he's a director in the company, which is a different relationship. That relationship might, for example, be limited in time, and I need to keep that data, and so on and so forth. So I need to build that data into a process that goes into employment issues, that goes into corporate housekeeping issues, that goes into various areas into a company. And you need to sync the stream of that data, that relationships, over the longer time of the lifetime of such a company. And then you think, there are parallel other companies where the company might be a shareholder in, and what information would you get there? The company starts to create relationship like joint ventures with other companies, and you need to think even further on how you get those structures. And the more and more you get involved with thinking about that, you'll figure out that there is a whole corpus of information you need to keep your eye on. We haven't even thought at this point in time now, does that information we have and that contracts we build relate to the law? How do they relate to precedent cases from courts? So we would have to test our content here against those applications, and that is sort of where all these things sort of become more complicated. But only if you think in those sort of processes and context and data and interfacing, you'll at the end of the day create an application of wider use to a company, for example, that interfaces with other tools. And this is, for me, an important issue because that tells me what do I need. I do need people who, of course, understand the legal process and how I set up a company. I need people who understand the business process in a company and how a company manages that process. I need the technicians who understand sort of how to work with the tools, how to store that data, how to retrieve that data at a later point in time and use it for different purposes. And we in practice make the experience that we are able to find those people. We find people who have studied, I don't know, IT as an undergraduate in high school, and they move to study law probably at university. But we also do find people who are well versed in IT and have a long practice in working in applications with a legal background, who more learn to understand certain legal concepts. And by putting these teams together, we think that more and more of these interdisciplinary skills are important, and that's sort of the people we are looking for, we are hiring at the moment, if that is sort of understandable as a beginning of a statement.
Oh. Thank you, Stefan. So your statement is, in my view, if I could have a comment on this, is a very, in some way, I think that a very modest way to see law tech. So it is one of the main aims of informatics, of course, to say, okay, what we need, what we urgently need, is something like, if I understand you correctly, information and processes well integrated within the company and between companies or bodies, and this should be this kind of process integration and data integration and information integration will be a very important step. And for this, we would need, in my wording, a common understanding, ontologies, etc., to put them together. And this is a very difficult task and necessary step as a basis for further leak tech applications. But what we quite often hear is, what we need is predictive artificial intelligence, smart legal contracts, all these kind of very fancy things which were developed in the last 10 years. Whereas we all know that most of the basis is not yet finished. Just if we reflect to what Jonathan said, if we speak about open data would be a very nice foundation for many of the things pointed out by Stefan. But if we look even to open governmental data, Austria is doing its best, but still a lot is still not covered and should be done quite urgently, because this could be also one of the basic components to realize what Stefan was pointing out. Before we can do the more other things which could, of course, be performed isolated. We can do predictive artificial intelligence for machines or something like this. But before we can do it for society, etc., the first step, which is, if I understand Stefan correctly, process and information integration in a sound manner, will be necessary. Could I ask Jonathan to comment on this?
Yeah.
Please.
So, yeah, I'm on. This for me, yes, this is the new brass ring. Whoever can figure out how to turn legalese into computable bit pieces wins the battle. This is like, to physics, what string theory, this is our string theory, our unified field theory. If we can actually convert legalese into codable bits. And there are a lot of folks who are much more steeped in computer technology than I, who are fighting to get what would be the Nobel Prize in law if they can do that, to create something that becomes a mutable smart contract for every single occasion, taking little discrete bits of law, turning them into clauses, turning them into contracts, turning them into universal understanding. That's going to be the brass ring. Now, for me, it's been interesting. I feel very much like a Neanderthal in the Homo sapien world at this point, because for us, 10 years ago, it was so easy. There was no one doing this, and all we had to do was cherry pick the lowest hanging fruit to create the Uber of law, you know, the little repository, just steal any little, you know, any the most basic ideas from other service sectors and apply it to law. That's what we were doing. That was the world before machine learning, semantic systems, AI. That's all now, you know, baby steps into where we are now. So for us, the question becomes, and for me, my job as an academic, particularly an academic without many students who are steeped in technology, is how do we ensure that they get to play a vital role as lawyers at this technology revolution? This is the scary part for lawyers. How do they dive in if they don't know the technology? But I think there's a scary piece for society if we do not incorporate those who are most steeped in legal reasoning in the process. It's going to be AI run amok. It's going to be technology run amok unless there are those who understand law and policy and philosophy and ethics to be the partner with the folks building these systems. So my goal is to always make sure there's a role for the lawyer, the newfangled lawyer, in the process of building these newfangled systems that Stefan is imagining and you imagine.
Thank you. Brian? Would you comment on
yes.
this? Yeah.
Well, I totally agree that there's so many aims that we individually and collectively can strive towards. I guess what I would add is and maybe to supplement a little bit of what Jonathan is saying. So from our point of view, so when I try to think about the pedagogy for Light Lab, we try to develop it. So there's certain aspects, and I liked a lot of what some of the earlier speakers were talking about in terms of the core competencies of the new law and the digital lawyer, right? So to me, I always use the word computational thinking because we were so just to clarify what you said a little bit earlier on, Armin. So the first thing, I'm new to academia, so then I've learned. I joke that I've been in a big law, I've been in big bank. Academia is a different beast, right? It's so siloed. They're the research versus teaching, and they're all these different elements, right? But I was lucky because at the time that I was hired, I didn't know this actually. University had approved a new degree. Interdisciplinary was a big push, and so they created this new degree called the Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science. And through that, they created a fintech course, which is led by Department of Computer Science and the Business School. And they had a Design Plus course, and it's led by Department of Architecture. And there are actually 4 other degrees linked to this, right? But those are 2 that Light was immediately attached to, which is great. But some of the aspects that is really quite different from the American experience, but maybe more similar to some of the European experience, is it's an undergraduate course. So these are all really young kids, right, with less life experience. So they didn't do a prior degree in something. They just came from high school. So it's undergraduate, right? So how do you prepare them? So that's why it's about computational thinking. How do you break it down? And lawyers like to think that they're experts. It's all here, right? And that's one of the things that needs to kind of break down. The other thing that we had pedagogically was the commercial aspect. So it's business model canvas, right? So we teach them business model canvas so they know about how business works and how the different parts of business have different legal contracts. Thank you very much, right? And that goes towards Stefan's point, right? So if you're going to set up a company, you've got the corporate aspects, you've got employment law contracts, you've got all these different aspects of the law that come in. We teach, we introduce them to design thinking, again, being client focused and user focused, again, something lawyers have been horrible at for many years, right? And so these, and then agile is the other thing that we do in terms of project management and team building. So we actually try to get them to work in teams in project-based assignments and the like, which again, in B school and computer science, if you heard, that's the norm. Lawyers and law school, no. They all do individual projects. So there's so many cultural things that we're trying to do. We've been really ambitious. I was just doing the marking for my second semester now. As we prepare, we're lucky enough, I've introduced, next year we're going to have 4 more new classes, as in courses. So hearing the previous examples of having the difficulty of introducing this into the curriculum was kind of fascinating, because I guess I've been quite lucky that way. But mind you, they're all elective. So hence my question about the demand side. I don't know what the demand's going to be like, right? So my first class was actually pretty high. I had 50 students in my class, and I was overwhelmed, right? But and then second semester was COVID, so everything was online. So there are lots of dropouts and changes and like. So I think just to finish off, I think we're all doing our bit to see how the different aspects come together. The interdisciplinary is key, but it's easier to say than do.
Thank you. So, Brian, since you are the originator of the blip and the legal hackers, so you know the whole development from the very beginning.
Jonathan, you mean Jonathan?
Jonathan, and how was the agility, like Brian has pointed out? It should be agile, and agile means if you have some teams, how are the roles within these teams in the development of future products, where things are really not changing in the evolutionary way, like if we look to Europe, sometimes GDPR is coming and then things has to be changed quite rapidly. So how do you see this kind of problems? And between, as Brian said, agility is important, even starting with students with the age of 19, 20 to learn this kind of agile development. And you have started this kind of hackathons, which are, I think, also quite agile by nature. I don't know, just to learn from your experiences.
I'm going to tell you something embarrassing there. All right, we did the first ever legal hackathon in 2012. Before then, the students and I would go to hackathons, and we felt very much out of place. We came with our legal mindset, everything's got to be perfect. You don't reiterate and reiterate and reiterate. I didn't know the term agile as an organizing concept, as a developer concept, until 2013. So we did the first legal hackathon without even me knowing the concept of agile design. And that was, and I got to say, none of my students knew the concept either. So what did we do at the time after 2012? And you got to imagine what it's like to have a lawyer at a regular hackathon. We would go to the hackathons and we'd be the only lawyers in the room, and we would speak and mingle with everyone for the first hour or so, and then people would organize into teams so we'd know where the hell to go. And what was our role? What was the role of the lawyer in the hacker environment? 46 hours later, after a weekend hackathon, the folks would demo show what they produce, and the lawyers would be a wet blanket on the flame of revolution. We would tell them everything they did wrong, why it's not going to work. You didn't protect your IP, you didn't divide up your equity, you didn't think about all these regulations. It was a horrible thing for a lawyer to do in that room. And I vowed from that moment on that we would not be those, what I call them, yeah, but lawyers in a why not world. We would be the lawyers to actually work and adopt the hacker spirit and participate with the hackers and show the rest of the world and be essentially smart lay people translating what the hackers were doing for the world. So what I did was, and I was fairly proactive at this, I come from a standalone law school. We do one thing, we teach law. And I got to tell you, pretty much until I came along, we taught 500-year-old law. We taught property and torts and contracts. We taught feudal law. We weren't teaching lawyers to understand what the digital economy and what the digital world was going to look like. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to go right to the source. I went to MIT, and I essentially said to the folks at MIT, let's collaborate. You folks are doing crazy things. You need some lawyers to help you navigate the process. Guess what? We're trying to do crazy things. We don't know how to do crazy things. We need technologists to hold our hand. So we started to create legal hackathons now where lawyers would partner with technologists. That was, I think, the revolution. That's when I think legal hacking really got off the ground, when it was lawyers more as project managers, product managers, smart lay people who understand the lay of the land and know how to put the pieces together, but not working in isolation. We would define the problem and use some combination of legal think, technology think, business think, marketing think to create a viable product. That was the difference. And that's been, I think, the revolution. And to the extent we've been able to virtualize a lot of that now, that's been, I think, and be able to reiterate. So I always hated that. We would do one thing at one legal hackathon, and then another legal hackathon somewhere else in the world, someone else was building something else. And we're all living on our own little echo chambers without communication, without the ability to build on the shoulders of those who came before us. Now I think we have the ability to do that. Now let me tell you what's happened very recently. I never teach in the summer. I haven't taught in summer in about 10 years since the last economic meltdown. I decided I'm going to teach this summer, but I'm only going to work on projects that are completely immediately essential. So what are we working? We started only working on COVID mitigation projects. The role of the lawyer in COVID, to work with technologists to mitigate COVID. So we're working with MIT on their contact tracing app. But working on the privacy principles surrounding it. How can we create privacy sanctifying COVID mitigation? And then, if you're following the news, you're aware America is in turmoil right now. Is there a role for lawyers on the vanguard to help reorganize society, to help us through the crises that we're going through? So now we're working on protest support apps. What role can lawyers play in helping protest movement? That's where we're focusing on. And now the big problem is lawyers have always been slow to the revolution. That doesn't work anymore. How do we become players on the forefront? How do we anticipate what the world's going to look like? Now, what we didn't know 6 months ago was the future was going to happen much faster than we thought. All I want to do is to train my students and future lawyers to anticipate what the world's going to look like in 5, 10, 50 years. And how can we be more prescient and anticipate how society will change and how we can write better laws and play a role in shaping the new society to stave off dystopian scenarios. That's what I want to do. And that's what I think we're doing as long as we can sort of mutate what legal pedagogy looks like.
Thank you. I think this is a very, very good approach. So speaking about COVID, so we have similar experiences with our tracing app. And out of a sudden, just to follow up the story, 3 of our people at our research center say, okay, we will check this and look if they are compliant to all this kind of GDPR, etc. And then they found something like 25 improvements. And then there was also Max Schrems, I don't know, you know him, the guy who shoot Facebook.
He's even famous in America.
Yeah, so he took another look, and out of this, I think we are perhaps the first country where I would think that in Europe, that the tracing app is compliant with privacy issues, etc. But the initiative came from these young guys. They did their own hackathon by themselves. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Brian, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, in some ways, and just to finish off on the point, it comes back to the earlier, some of the earlier discussions, because now if you explore the tracing app question, it's now a battle of the standards, right? So you've got, again, to my earlier, slightly earlier point about Apple and Google setting something where they say, only Bluetooth, but not GPS, and that's a problem for the MIT model, right? The Safe Path uses GPS, right? And then there's the centralized approach and decentralized approach regarding privacy, right? And the approach. So the technology. So you have to understand the technology to understand intersect that with the law, and then you have a battle of standards, which gets geopolitical. like 3G, like 5G, right? So they are so many different. It's a fascinating world that we live in right now, and I think to Jonathan's point, the role of the lawyer, it remains even more critical, but needs to be lawyers that understand. And the phrase that I use is I'm trying to train my students not to be scared of technology, right? Traditionally, the people who go into law school, oh, I don't like math, I don't like science, that's why I went to law, right? If you're afraid of that, you're not willing to embrace some of these things, which are so critical in so many aspects of the law. So, that's what I love about legal tech. Or I actually prefer the word law tech, because legal tech is somehow affiliated with helping law firms make more money, right? And whereas law tech can be seen in so many different ways, whether you link it with gov tech or reg tech and whatnot. And access to justice. So I think with law tech, it can be applied in every single aspect of the law. So I love that. So recently we had the good fortune with the Iron Tech Lawyer Invitational, where the team that came from Hong Kong U, and this was all their own idea. They created an NLP based a data bank using open source Allen AI, Allen NLP, specifically for workers' compensation, right? It was their idea. So basically, they were applying this, and so I had to connect them with employment lawyers, right? Because I'm not an employment lawyer, right? So, and they were just applying this to different aspects of the law. So that's, I think, the wonderful connecting aspect where law tech is concerned.
But perhaps to ask Stefan. Stefan, do you think that the law tech benefits legal services just for reducing cost, or it is also that we have better outcomes for clients and organizations already at the state where we are now? Does it already increase significantly efficiency, productivity, and growth, and also give some better outcomes? And if yes, how would you integrate such team of lawyers to actually work with counterparts from coders and people from computer science, etc.? What is your experience in this area to put the teams together?
I mean, that's a great question out of real life. Thank you for that. Now, I think from what we are doing in real life, it is not immediately reducing cost. Actually, we very often get to work on things that would otherwise not get done because the company would not put in the resources. For example, we are at the moment reviewing some 400,000 documents where a client sort of has information in various databases and needs to make sure whether the legal documents reflect the information in the database. So, for example, we are mining index clauses in those documents. Index clausing meaning you're paying a permanent fee for something and you index that at the consumer price index. And with the number of documents we had calculated, it would take 1 or 2 million euros to actually mine that data. It's pretty unlikely that the client would have, number one, the capacity to do that, and number two, hire an additional team for that cost to mine that data. Doing that with NLP software in that particular context, we are able to do that relatively quick within, let's say, a week with, reading all the data, then sort of fine-tuning, redoing, figuring out some of the legal elements that need to be clarified, but the index clauses are not that complicated. So that's done at a fraction of the cost it would take manually. It is improving quality, therefore, in terms for the client, and it is coming to use at an area where the client would never have invested for an additional team to do that work. I think probably when that client might get sold, at some due diligence exercise later on. That I wouldn't exclude it, but it basically is the sort of experience we are having also in other contexts. Now, how do we go about that? We go about that by reading the first 10 or 15 documents by hand, more or less, out of a sample set, and annotating those documents, sitting down with the coders, and the coders figure out how to identify those clauses in the various contracts. Having already experience in similar projects in the past, of course, gets the team relatively quickly to move on such a problem. It's getting more complicated when you have to apply more complicated applications, like, when you, the question for me is always, okay, now you've mined that data, what do you do with that data, right? Is it just that you verify it against your simple relational database where you have stored some information? Or do you think about, once you have now that information, do you, again, I'm always getting to this issue, how do I store data legally? How do I take care of relationships? How do I get legal information in the set of data? And then we work, for example, we work with knowledge graphs like Neo4j and similar software. Here then, you get more of the expertise because, you know that better than anybody else. Also, coders are specialized. So it's not one coder. So Kevin Ashley, for example, mentioned they are coding in Python. None of our team, for example, is working in Python. It's more Java and other tools and languages that are being used. So what we try to do is we try to get experts from the various areas. That's legal design thinking in a way on setting up a structure. We get people on, of course, on the legal side who are familiar with the problem, who guide us to what are the relevant sequences of text we are looking for in a text. We get people who are specialized in database, in AI, to the extent AI is the right word, but we are trying to sort of make use of all those tools and then arrive at a certain result. And usual outcome is we're not taking anybody's work away. The usual outcome is we are adding quality and we are adding speed to a process.
So at the end, it reduces costs a lot. Huh?
Of course, the end user pays something to us, but it's much less than a user would have paid if they would have done it by hand. And I tell you from a legal practitioner side, if you have to review 100,000 or more documents with a team, the margin of error at the end of the day is significant. Yeah. Where the computer keeps on going, right?
Mm-hmm. So it's perfect NLP application in document retrieval, etc. Yes.
For example, yes, one of those.
But perhaps to Jonathan, since you are so deep in the field, is there something like a strategic foresight for legal tech? That we say, okay, this is what we are aiming to, what we are expecting for the next, I don't know, like in technology, people are trying to do this kind of things for whatever reason. It could be sustainability, it could be technology per se. But are there people doing some research on or some studies on strategic foresight on legal tech?
That's the question, do we have a 5-year plan or a life cycle?
Or just some vision yeah.
I think we all think we have the vision. We all think we're futurists. I mean, a lot of us over the past 10 years had looked to Richard Susskind's book to see what the future of law is going to look like. But now I think anyone's guess now is as good as anyone else's. I'd like to think, so every year we run the Legal Hackers Global Summit. And I know Stefan was there last time. That's where I like to think a lot of this thinking is happening, when we can get prescient legal futurists together in the room and compare what's going on in their own ecosystems and figure out how it's going to play out. I don't have an answer. I'm actually writing a book.
To put it another way, should the president of your university do some strategic foresight on legal tech?
No, I don't think so. I think they always get it wrong. I think we started Legal Hackers the 1 year we did not actually have a dean. I had tried for years to run a legal hackathon, and the administration and the colleagues all thought what we were doing was somehow unlawful, evil. It wasn't going to help the students pass the bar. It was going to divert their energies. So no, every single year. Then 1 year, a friend of mine was the acting dean. And I said, authority, I said, why don't we do a legal hackathon now? He said, fine, go for it. So we did it and we proved the worth of it. But here's the problem, and I don't know how this plays out in Europe and in Asia. Legal education in America plays to one audience, US News and World Report. That is all that matters in America. And the US News and World Report rankings are essentially, based on someone's thinking circa 1985. This is what it is to be a lawyer in this world, and this is what we're going to value. And the law schools who teach X, Y, and Z and get their students X, Y, and Z passage rates and these positions, they will win. US News and World Report does not value students who learn legal technology. It does not value students who decide they want to do a venture. They want to do a startup. They want to do a legal tech startup. If you didn't go to a law firm, that's no good. We've got to change that mindset, not just in the hierarchy of legal academia and in the hierarchy of at least the US legal profession. I look in awe at what I see going on in Asia and Australia and Europe, UK in particular. The fact that they are really exploring new models of legal service provisioning, allowing non-lawyers to buy into law firms, allowing public offerings of law firms, allowing integration with other service sectors. In America, we hold on to our profession with all of our might. It is a guild, and no one else is going to crack our guild. And that's going to be the death of us, ultimately, if we don't recognize that there are new ways to we just submitted, California is starting to be a little bit more forward-looking. We submitted comments to California Ethics Committee to ask if we can actually tokenize law students. So what do I mean by that? Allowing someone to buy an interest in a law student before they're viable, before they're able to practice law. You can buy an interest, and down the line, you'll get some value from their law degree. Is it going to fly? It may not, but I think we're opening the door to those sorts of innovations, which we will not see from the traditional law school administration hierarchy or the bar associations, at least in America. I don't know if that answered the core question.
Yeah, perhaps to continue with you just for a moment. You have been a Fulbright professor at the University of Amsterdam, so you know also continental Europe in some way. Yeah? How would you evaluate or how would you see the status of LegTech, legal tech, law tech in continental Europe, roughly, out of your experience in Amsterdam and other countries, just to compare it with the US and the English-speaking world, perhaps, and also with Brian. Yeah?
All right, so in my limited exposure, here's what I think. I think no one holds a candle to what's going on in the UK and Australia. I think those two countries are leading the way. There might be, Israel maybe, there might be a couple other places that are doing degrees of innovation, but I look in awe every time I see a demo coming out of the UK or the Australian community and what they're doing with legal tech. We're doing legal tech in America, but it's still sort of an outlier here. What I found, so 10 years ago, I started the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic about 13 years ago. I wanted to create a network of law clinics along our model where we could share resources and we can all learn from each other and not reinvent the wheel. I was very close to the Obama White House, particularly the Office of Science and Tech Policy. I asked them if they could they started something called Startup America. Can we use the Startup America Foundation as a vehicle to allow pockets of legal innovation, allow law schools and lawyers around the country to help evolve the system? And in America, they're very slow to react. Instead, I went to Europe. And Europe, which does not have a long history of experiential legal education, they don't have, to the extent they have clinics, it's for, really it's not in a business tech context, it's really in a landlord-tenant context, an immigration context, to help the most marginalized members of society. But the European Commission gave us a grant for 500,000 euro as part of the Horizon 2020 vision, and allowed us to create a network in Europe, the iLink network, which I have posted, which I advertised for. And it was a network that's with 5 core partners, but it expanded about 28 partners, clinics that were designed to help the innovation ecosystem within their respective regions. So Amsterdam was among them, University of London was among them, Humboldt and Hans Bredow Institute. There were a couple that really were trying to build out that ecosystem. So I was sort of in awe that Europe kind of leapfrogged over America in developing this interplay between law school education and startup technology concepts. Now we brought it back to America. We started something called the Legal Technology Lab, which is very much like what iLink was doing. I think we're starting to see it happen, but it's in fits and starts. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. I think a lot more is going to happen in the European context going forward, particularly if you look towards the UK.
Thank you. Brian, have some remarks. You have been working in Australia for quite a long time, and also, of course, Hong Kong.
Well, I started in Australia. I left for a long time, and now I'm
you,
back.
You were in Perth, Western Australia. Yes, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'd echo a lot of what Jonathan has said. So the UK and specifically Australia is a federation. It's New South Wales that's really progressive. Okay. Other states are not as progressive, shall we say, in terms of the deregulation, shall we say, of the industry. But you're right. I mean, so to build upon that, so here in Asia, which is very diverse, like Europe, right, and even more so, and it's not as coordinated. So ALTA is the Australian Legal Tech Association. They just had AltaCon here, and I agree with Jonathan. You know, the number of indigenous legal tech solutions coming out is phenomenal. In Singapore, it's led by Flip, and that's again government led. And they're, you know, they've got and it's, you know, when the Chief Justice of the country says, you know, lawyers should do legal tech, it just and they fund it. It happens, right? Hong Kong is more British colonial style with other, you know, with Chinese characteristics, and so there are. But recently, there's been more movement towards RegTech on the one hand. So, for example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority looking at you know, those aspects, but also on the law tech side, you've got 2 funds set up. One is for, you know, Hong Kong is like a lot of other countries. The vast majority of lawyers don't work in big firms, right? So, and it's the mom and pop law firms have the, you know, doing Microsoft is high tech, right? So they've put it together a fund for the small law firms and barristers to actually tap for upgrading, especially during COVID, right? And then they've also put together a fund for alternative dispute resolution during the COVID period when people cannot see each other and the like. So Asia really is developing in lots of, and then China is phenomenal with online courts. You've got the BATs, the Alibabas, and the like, doing online dispute resolution. Lots of the solutions coming out there. So to come back to your other question about foresights and the like. So one of the things I've been toying with, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts, is you know, during COVID, a lot of people started examining the concept of telemedicine. I'm like, so why aren't people talking about tele-law, right? Because in theory, we don't even have to do diagnosis of I don't need to see Jonathan's face in great detail to say, you know, does he look warm? Do I need to touch his forehead? No, right? I can consult in this way. So in some ways, there is some of that happening. People are now having to do more online research and working remotely. So I see hopefully more tele-law coming about, right? And then the other concept potentially, yes, there's the Uber, Amazon, you know, platform, you know, the Rain and Court kind of, and other types of platforms of alternatives and APIs and plugins coming out. But then the other thing I kind of toy with is kind of the Google of law, right? Everything we Google now for the answer, you know, and that happens in medicine. I see that happening in law, and that has, you know, interesting access to justice, you know, elements to it. But as we all know, the same way that when you diagnose using Google, it often is not quite right. Same with the law. So these, but the technology is all getting better, right? But there are licensing issues about what you can or cannot do, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that those are kind of interesting, you know, trends or directions potentially, you know, where law and technology go.
I like this idea of tele-law, yeah? Because as a consequence of COVID, because I think if there's a benefit of COVID, then this is that with technology, especially IT, we could solve a lot of problems, and this has been shown uh, by this pandemics. Yeah, we can do teleworking, we can do whatever,
I got
and
a question for
we
over
can
here.
learn out of this very, very well. Yeah.
I'd love to know what's going on in Europe and Asia. So because of COVID, our judges, our court system has finally recognized the need to virtualize. Last year, there's 90% of the judges would say, over my dead body, are we going to virtualize judicial process? Now it's just the name of the game. We have to do it. How has that proceeded in Europe and Asia? What's your exposure there?
I should give this question to Stefan. I think I can just answer it from the university point of view, that examinations, etc. So people who are very reluctant in the past, out of a sudden are getting very creative in finding some solutions. Stefan, have you some answer about the courts in Austria?
Yeah. Well, I just have been speaking to that on a conference 2 days ago. So there's a legal framework that is valid until the end of the year, that allows in particular in court hearings to use technology aspects. If parties agree, if everybody has the same sort of technology standard, if there is a sort of fair use of technology, accessibility, transparency, etc. But there is, in my opinion, on the security side, there isn't that much of a criteria. So, I mean, you might be right that certain people are reluctant, in particular lawyers are reluctant, on whether or not, for example, the client privilege is covered here. Not every element of a hearing is public, for example. What is spoken in court is public, but if I file a document during a hearing, that is normally not public, right? So is there a platform where I can speak to the court, on the other hand, in parallel file a document during the hearing, and is that confidential? Can I turn to the side and speak to my client and that not being on the platform, etc., etc. So there are tools out there, actually, we figured out, but it's not the usual ones you hear in public. My hope is that this will continue. We see one thing that I find very positive is that it's also possible to have shareholder meetings online, even for listed companies, and more so for smaller companies where they can organize that themselves. That's very good. But if you look around, there are always bits and pieces of legislation that are also missing. So it would need a more thorough review of what is all necessary, for example, to have a digital process where also the documents are digitalized, where signatures are digitalized. There's this issue, for example, we have this handy signature, as it's called, so the authorized signature. Is the authorized signature also covering the signature for a corporate, or is it also only covering the signature for a private person that actually receives that digitalized signature? There are a couple of legal questions, but it is. I have the feeling it's being adopted. I have actually, I'm speaking to judges who have projects, and in Austria, I mean, we need to say, and you've been involved in that probably much more than I did. We are very well advanced in digitalization in e-justice, e-government. There are great projects for. We need to say for more than 20 years we do our filings at court for digitally. Our land register is digital. Our commercial register is digital. Our tax filings are being done digital. The decisions are rendered digitally. So there's quite a nice environment already, and I would think that things are being adopted. And we have a Justice 3.0, 4.0 project for the courts, where the judges would have electronic files and work with electronic files that are also available to the lawyers in the proceeding. So a lot of things that are going on in that context here in Austria, but also from what I know from our open laws platform, that's not the same across Europe. So there are big differences between the European countries. It's not a European standard. We in Austria here are pretty lucky in that environment we have.
Thank you. We are running out of time a little bit. I don't know if there are no questions from the audience.
No, there are not. No, you can continue.
So perhaps we can start with some closing statements because we should we should end at 8 o'clock, right? Yes.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So perhaps
You're not cut off at 8
yeah.
o'clock, but,
So starting
it's pretty late for some people on like Brian.
yes, after such a long day. Yeah. So perhaps, especially with Brian, now it is 2 o'clock in the morning, I think, in your country. So Brian, perhaps you could start with the closing remarks so that we can continue then with Jonathan and Stefan, please.
Sure, thank you. So maybe just to briefly answer Jonathan's question. So in Hong Kong, at least, I don't know whether you had seen it there, but there's kind of some of the photos went viral when the courts finally opened. The queues of people outside, right? So what has happened is that people are now, and during this period, and I posted it on Richard Susskind's, remote courts website, in terms of the update. So there are new rules about online, hearings and the like. But the main issue in Hong Kong is still digitization. So there has been a digitization project that's been ongoing. Hopefully, this will now force it to be expedited. But they still need to get that bit done before you can actually do much more online. There's a big push on ADR, and ODR, online dispute resolution, and that's something that the government is pushing quite a bit. Initially, due to Belt and Road, but also you working with APEC for smaller countries around the region for dispute resolution. But I guess in terms of closing remarks, I'm just trying to think through. I think if the topic here is about legal education, so in some ways, that's why I say I build on the shoulders of giants, because in the US, the concept of legal clinics are quite well known, and especially in the areas of startups and technology and innovation, right? Out here, yes, Hong Kong U is the only university of the 3 law schools here that actually did have a clinic, but it's in the more traditional human rights, refugees type areas, right? And poverty law. So Light is in that vein, but with various twists. I specifically call it experiential learning, because for various reasons we don't actually have a licensed lawyers. So I'm admitted in 3 jurisdictions, but I stepped away from being a lawyer, and they're not going to pay for my insurance. So we're structuring it in a different way, shall we say? So it's experiential learning. And I also called it Light Lab. And I remember, this is akin to Jonathan's comment, when I mentioned that to the former dean, he says, lab, what lab? Why do we have a lab in law school, right? And then I kind of laughed a little bit. I said, I had to convince the new dean, right? So, and it's a lab because we're going to try new and different things, including technology. So sometimes it's about pedagogies. And as an aside, I think it was mentioned earlier on about, training of mindsets. So when I left Credit Suisse, besides setting up ACMI, I also set up a social enterprise called Young Makers and Change Makers. And that's about inclusive STEAM education. So we were doing programs for, across Hong Kong for K to 12. So that was kind of what I was doing separately, again, partly because I have kids in that age group, right? And we had some degree of luck there too. So one of the competitions I was involved in was called Technovation, and where it targets girls aged between 10 to 18. So you ideate, you prototype, and then you create apps using App Inventor, and then you pitch it. And so we were lucky. The first year we presented it, our top team made it to the finals at Google, and they won. So there's talent out there. So the thing is I mentioned that in terms of it's about building the mindsets. It's about starting as early as possible. It's about being inclusive about it and being very consciously inclusive about it, because it's all too easy to be certain segments of society get exposed and privileged to have this, and then you have the AI governance issues, right? It's only, dare I say it, white males of a certain, socioeconomic and regions that are educated, and they're creating the algorithms, and therefore they are not conscious of all the exclusions, right? So therefore, there's so many aspects involved in it, but I think, to me anyway, inclusion is just so important. And from there, and that includes inclusion of different disciplines as well. So this year in our class, we had somebody who's a translation major, a design major. We had some CS students and like so. I think some of my best comments were from students who worked in teams and said, "This is fantastic." Some of my worst comments were from students. They said, "This is so horrible," right? So it's a journey that we're all going through, and it's wonderful to be in this community as we learn together.
Thank you very much for the very nice closing words on inclusiveness, both academically to say it should be interdisciplinary at the one hand side, and on the other side, societal. No one should be left behind. Yeah, I like this, and yes, I hope that LegTech could help a lot here. Perhaps some closing words of yours, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think the problem we're experiencing today and will likely experience next year and 10 years from now is the same problem we've had for the past several hundred years, and that's access to justice and bridging the justice gap. We've seen a couple $2 billion flow into legal tech over the past 2 years. Almost all of that is going to transform legal process and law firms for the moneyed interests. To the extent we are experimenting with new models of legal services delivery, at least at the law school level, I think it's essential for us to focus on the access to justice concept, to bring legal tech tools to bridge the justice gap. You know, everyone in America, they say there's too many lawyers. I'm convinced we don't have too many lawyers. They're just not distributed effectively, and they're not compensated properly for the sorts of work a society needs its lawyers to do. So we started a justice lab last year with one objective: to bring new technology tools to bring tools for marginalized constituencies. If we don't do it, and the VC money and the private equity money and doesn't flow into it and only flows to reforming corporate legal process, then there are going to be further roadkill on the path to legal innovation. So that's where I hope a lot of our energies flow, particularly those of us in these communities, in these academic communities.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think this is a great task to make law also explainable for everybody and to be used by everybody. Yes, and perhaps Stefan?
Well, thank you very much for participating all here. From my point of view, of course, this is a mixed thing, being the organizer on one hand and sitting on that panel. My greatest objective would be that this subject of teaching, education, development is being taken serious and taken forward. I think, honestly, I think that legal tech applications will scale much quicker than many people in the industry think. Currently, when we speak to people who have their ears out there in the market, we still hear that for most of the potential users, it has not really become clear what is the use in their particular operation. That is why I'm so sort of riding on the issue. It needs to fit into business processes. But I think that's like the dam breaching. Once there is a break, applications will have to be adopted quick because it will have significant issues for management in companies to get best quality information about their legal setups, and legal tech might be extremely helpful in that context. So I support very much that that there is more training, at the previous panel also mentioned, and as Kevin Ashley mentioned, whom I thank very much for his keynote. And I'm not so much sort of now addressing that panel. I mean, I sort of wrap it up for myself as well on the day, and take the opportunity to thank you all for participating, and thank you on this panel for the great discussion.
Thank you, Stefan. So summing up, I can see on your words, so we are reaching perhaps a tipping point in legal tech, so that there will be a boom in legal tech.
Hope so.
So the question, who will be building the legal applications of the future, this will be answered soon, and this will be the brightest of our students in academics for the for the good of society, that no one should be left behind. I think that this could wrap up everything. And I thank you very much to the panelists. And I learned a lot, both from you, Jonathan, Brian, and of course also from Stefan. As I always say, my students are my teachers. So thank you very much. And I wish you a nice ReMeP also for tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. That is great closure to this day. There's nothing more I can add, and always was grateful to be your student, so I learned more than I ever could.